Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian, and welcome to Bird Bombs, Helpful Bursts of ID Info. Our topic tonight is Ups and Downs in Colorado, and this is episode 42 of Bird Bombs. And I'm joined by Laura Stedman, and Laura will come in at the end of the presentation to help with any questions and comments you may have, maybe ask a few questions herself. I'm excited about tonight's topic. This is usually, my tagline for Bird Bombs is helpful bursts of ID info. And tonight, though, we're not going to be looking at bird identification per se, although bird ID is a very critical backbone of what we're going to be talking about. But we're not going to be talking about bird ID info. Instead, we're going to be looking at the North American Breeding Bird Survey and what population trends have been derived from the data collected by this very important monitoring study, continent-wide monitoring study. So a little different, no bird ID focus per se, but some of the fruits of a lot of bird ID are going to be the focus of what we're going to look at tonight. So the North American Breeding Bird Survey, and we just call it the BBS, and that's pretty much how I'll be referring to it further as we go through the presentation tonight. And what it is a long-term continent-wide roadside survey of breeding birds. So let's look at that again. So long-term, the BBS is entering into its 61st year of data collection this year, and continent-wide, so all across North America. And it's a roadside survey. So the surveys aren't happening out in remote habitat away from roads, but actually the surveys are occurring from the roads themselves, mostly tertiary roads that are more suitable for a bird survey than busier, more major roadways. But it's a roadside survey and it's focused on breeding birds. So not migration, not winter time. We have other things for those periods of the year, Christmas bird count, for example, in the winter, banding operations happening during spring and fall migration, for example, there. So this is focused on the breeding birds. And so, as I said, the BBS is a long-term, large-scale, international, actually, avian monitoring program. So it includes efforts in Canada and the US and Mexico. Now, I'm a little less informed about what actually is going on down in Mexico, but there are survey routes down there as well. And it was initiated in 1966 for the purpose of tracking the status and trends of North American bird populations. The BBS is coordinated jointly by the USGS Eastern Ecological Science Center here in the US and the Canadian Wildlife Service there north of our border. So they work together collaboratively to coordinate this study. So Chandler Robbins, who I have pictured here, who is the author of the Golden Guide to Birds, which was one of my first birding field guides. But Chandler Robbins, working with the Patuxent Wildlife Research Center, along with his colleagues, was the one who had the brainchild of creating the BBS and got the whole thing going. And the initial idea was that there were problems that they were seeing in bird populations related to use of chemicals in the environment like DDT and DDE. So bad things were going on, and they wanted to start this study, especially in response to concerns for pesticide use. Now, a lot of the ill effects of those particular pesticides have been ameliorated for various reasons, but bird populations continue to be impacted by widespread threats. So we have habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, land use changes, and other chemicals that are still contaminating the environment that are still areas of concern. So the study is addressing those kinds of concerns now that we've got past the DDT, DDE era. But we still have a lot of stuff going on. And the BBS is used by national, state, and local agencies, researchers, wildlife managers to provide information on significant changes that are going on in bird populations. So it's one of the important data sources continent-wide that people can turn to help answer some questions about what's going on with bird populations in their areas of concern. So I'll talk a little bit now about how the BBS works, and I'm just going to preface it by saying this is my participation in the BBS, and I think this is true pretty much all the people who are involved in it, is one of the great highlights of my birding year. It's one of the ongoing or repeated things that happen that I really look forward to, and it really is a peak of my birding year. So I'm really glad that I've been able to be involved in it. The BBS depends on volunteers largely. Some people that participate as surveyors are doing it through their work. If they're working maybe for a wildlife agency, for example, Fish and Wildlife Service or something. But for the majority, they are volunteers, and these are birders who are skilled in identification of birds in the area of interest by sight and especially by sound. The great majority of birds that we detect on a BBS survey and identify are detected, or maybe only not seen at all, but are detected by sound and identified in that way. So that's a really important aspect of the ID skills that are necessary. There are established routes that have been created all across uh, North America, and each one is sampled once each year during the period of May 27th to July 10th, usually somewhere near the date of the prior year's survey. So maybe you survey your route, say at the end of May or maybe late June, depending on the circumstance. And each route is 24.5 miles long. Sometimes there's little skip over areas to avoid some area that maybe has too much traffic, but generally they're 24.5 miles long, and there's 50 stops along each route that are spaced half a mile apart. So that's kind of the setup, 24.5 miles long with 50 stops half mile apart, sampled once each year. And at those stops, and you go to the same stop every year, and you run the route in the same order, begin at the same stop number one and end at stop number 50. And at each one of those stops, we conduct what's called a point count. In this case, they're 3 minutes long. And the point is to, no pun intended, is to record every bird that is seen within a quarter mile of the stop and or heard out to any distance. And so this is actually a fairly challenging task to detect everything that's around or that in that time when you're there during just a 3 minute little window. Sometimes a stop may not have a whole lot happening. Other times there's a lot going on, and it's quite a task to sort through it all and record it just within 3 minutes. And it gets kind of tiring after you've done that 50 times, but fun. So the surveys all start about 30 minutes before local sunrise, and it takes about 4 to 5 hours to complete a particular survey route. There are some deficiencies in this method in terms of gathering data to help create trends for various species. For example, some habitats are undersampled. So they may be relatively rare habitats or very spotty and patchy in the environment. For example, wetland habitats are not real extensive. So any given roads that are forming the route of a survey may only encounter a small number of wetland habitats, or maybe high mountain habitats are not as accessible, fewer roads, and so those aren't generally sampled as well. Things like that. So some habitats are undersampled, and then there are some species that are undersampled. Nocturnal species, the surveys taking place during the daytime. Nocturnal species are undersampled. Some things that are rather secretive that don't make themselves evident very much. Those are also undersampled, or things that might be generally rare would be another example. And then, of course, observer skills vary. Some people are better at detecting birds, identifying birds, especially identifying sounds. Now, there are different steps that are taken during the analyses of the data that can help to normalize some of the differences among observers. And observers are encouraged to be the one who's running the route for multiple years to take care of some of that issue. But those are some of the deficiencies in this particular study that work against collecting information that's going to be helpful for discerning trends. There are over 4,100 survey routes in the continental US and Canada, and Colorado has 135 active routes right now. Last year, 2025, there were 79 observers that participated in surveying BBS routes here in Colorado. We've had, I think, just 6 routes that were unsurveyed, which was the fourth best coverage of any of the states in the US. So I was happy about that. And most observers have like one route that they'll do a year or maybe two. A few observers have maybe a couple more. and there's rare observers who may have a number of routes. The map that's shown in the lower left, the little dot there represents the starting point for all the different Colorado routes. And maybe if you can see well enough, the red dots are some unassigned or available routes right now, and most of the routes have black squares there indicating that they are assigned to somebody. But you can see how the routes are distributed across the state. It's a somewhat random situation for how routes are developed. And so they're kind of sampling all over the place there. On the right side of the screen here, I have two sections of Colorado just kind of showing with some lines how the routes are kind of laid out. You kind of get a feel for it on the landscape. So a view there in part of northeast Colorado on the upper map there, and the lower one showing part of southwest Colorado. The little squiggles kind of remind me of sperm cells, but aside from that, it's kind of neat too. You can see in the northeast Colorado, there's a lot of straight roads out there in the prairie country, and a lot of the routes are just basically little segments of straight lines. Whereas down in southwest Colorado, we got mountains and canyons and everything in the way, and the routes tend to be a lot more curvy and less straight lines. Just kind of cool to see that. So. So I want to focus a little bit on kind of what it's like to do a BBS route. My own BBS experience began in 1992 when I took on a new route that I helped to create in California. And I surveyed two routes in California through 2013. At the end of 2013, I moved here to Colorado and I didn't skip a beat. I got involved with the project here in Colorado in 2014. And currently, I've managed to adopt 10 different Colorado routes, which is a lot, but I really do love it. And I've been the state coordinator for the BBS here in Colorado since 2021, inheriting the task from longtime state coordinator Hugh Kingery, who has had a very long history in involvement with the BBS. So here's a hats off to you for all of his contributions. So here's my listing of BBS routes that I have assigned to me, and the stars on the map are indicating how they're distributed there. I'm going to highlight one of them in particular, the Paonia route, which is out there in Delta and Montrose counties. And that's the one I just want to kind of go through sort of what it's like to conduct a survey, and I'll use that route as my example. So I surveyed the Paonia route beginning in 2014 and every year since then through last year. We had to skip a year in 2020 during the COVID shutdown when the BBS did not occur during that year. But otherwise, it's been every year. And you can see on the right-hand part of the screen here, two representations of the route. One, a yellow line here on a road map showing kind of how things go. And then I've got another map here on the left with the various points laid out from this route. And so you can kind of see how it kind of saturates that part of the world there as we go along about every half mile with a point. So the route starts just south of the town of Paonia and runs southward and ends at the rim of the Black Canyon of the Gunnison in that national park. So awesome countryside there. It spans Delta County in the northern part and Montrose County in the south part. It's pretty far from my home. It takes me a day's drive to get out there, and I have to camp overnight. I could stay somewhere maybe, but I always like to camp overnight before I conduct the survey. And I usually pair the coverage of the Paonia route with coverage of another route I have called Powderhorn, which is in Gunnison County, not too far away from this route. So I usually camp at the north rim of the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park, and it is just a wonderful campground. Beautiful place. It's great to have this as something I'm looking forward to as a part of my BBS experience for this route, to be able to revisit the Black Canyon and that particularly that North Rim campground each year. Very, very wonderful opportunity. Fabulous place. If you've never been there, you got to work it into your itinerary. I love to get this campsite number 13 in the campground here amongst some lovely pinyon pine and juniper. Here's a snag that was in this campsite. You got a flicker there on the side of the snag. Flickers nest in that snag. Sometimes it's mountain bluebirds, and the campground has black-throated gray warblers and and Plumbeus vireos, and there's white-throated swifts overhead, and it's just a wonderful place to be hanging out. I like to camp. I like to cook when I'm camping. I'm a pretty good camp cook, actually. So I put in a few pictures of food there. That's one of the highlights of the event, as far as I'm concerned. And it's also a lovely place for wildflowers. I'm usually there at the beginning of June. In a lot of years, it's very flowerful. Some dry years, like maybe this year, will turn out to be may not have as many flowers, but just enjoying the wildflowers and other natural things is a great part of it, even aside from the survey I'm going to do the next morning. So now I'm going to look at each little segment of the route, at least briefly. And the route begins pretty early. I mentioned it was half an hour before local sunrise. And so the start time, official start time for this Paonia survey route is 5:14 a.m. And I have to get there in time for that to happen. And driving all the way from the campground is a 45-minute drive. So it's a pretty early start in the day, beginning in the dark and to get to my starting point while the light is starting to come up and the birds are becoming active. Things don't always go smoothly, though. Sometimes there's been some car troubles in trying to get there. 2021 was remarkable in that I had a flat tire twice and the same tire on the very same stretch of road 2 days in a row. So I tried to get there. First day, got a flat tire, had to cancel my coverage. Tried again the next day, got a flat tire. I was able then to with my timing to work it out a little bit better to still do the route, but you never know what's going to happen to slow you down along the way. So don't like that, but usually there's no problems. So here we have some views of some of the habitats along this first part of the route south of Paonia. So it goes through a lot of agricultural lands with pasture lands and hay fields and some water areas. Some of the fields are pretty wet and some beautiful open countries and open vistas. Some of the birds that I see in this part are things like the western meadowlark, very common, red-winged blackbird, very common. The Bullock's orioles are around where there's groups of trees. Some of the wet areas along the road or out in the fields have common yellowthroat, and even a few soras. I'll usually hear one or two or three soras at some different stops. Last year I had sandhill cranes along this part of the route. So a really enjoyable way to begin the morning. And then the next stops, 8 to 22, go through a different sort of area. The route rises up in elevation and goes through kind of a desert shrubland type coverage and some juniper habitat. And so it's much drier, and the bird variety kind of drops down a little bit. But there is still a good variety of species and some particular stops that are always particularly interesting. And that's one of the fun things about the BBS is you can anticipate the fun stops that are coming up that each year seem to be good for variety or for some of the fun species. There's a golden eagle that likes to hang out on this particular power pole near one of the stops, and I see it most years. And maybe the same individual has been doing that over the years I've been running the route. I don't know if they've traded up or what, but that's fun. And there's some sage thrashers out there, beautiful to listen to, mockingbirds, blue grosbeaks in a few spots, a lot of house sparrows in some stops, and rock wrens are a treat at some of the locations where there's some appropriate rock wren habitat. And then as I continue on, I get to come into some other kinds of things. So there, the Smith Fork of the Gunnison River is running through like stops 24 to 26. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of diversity. Here's that Smith Fork, and here's the creek itself and the stream itself. And there's all of a sudden a lot of new birds that I maybe hadn't heard earlier in the route. And I've even had a cuckoo on this section, pygmy owl, quite a few different birds. Some of the stops are quite diverse with different things. And then there's a lot of pasture habitat that's irrigated. And this is home to some particular birds. And then there's some pinyon juniper woodland along the way. So a fun variety of different habitats giving a nice variety of birds, yellow warblers in the riparian, the juniper, pinyon juniper habitat with things like blue-gray gnatcatcher and juniper titmouse and pinyon jay in a lot of years. And out in the grassy areas, the pasture lands, the savanna sparrow especially likes is pretty much kind of an obligate to that sort of habitat out there, looking for those irrigated pasture lands. So that's a fun one, western kingbird, of course, very regular out in those open habitats. And so I'm working my way south now, and I'm actually climbing up in elevation towards the Black Canyon. So here's the last segment of the route, and much of this part of the route is either going through pinyon juniper woodland or through a montane shrubland with serviceberry and sage and some other shrubs as well, until I get to the rim of the Black Canyon itself, where the conclusion of the route is. And so here there's brewer's sparrow, vesper sparrow, green-tailed towhee, and spotted towhee. And sometimes they're all singing kind of at the same time in some of this montane shrubland. And it can be a challenge to sort them all out and make sure you're not missing anything. Black-headed grosbeaks like some of that, and where there's some gamble oaks, along with the Virginia's warbler. And by the time I get close to the edge of the Black Canyon, there's always some white-throated swifts in the air right over me. A fantastic way to conclude at stops 49 and 50 with some white-throated swift action. So some of the great things about doing a BBS route is you get to explore and learn a new area. Most of the routes are not necessarily located in a place that you've spent much time before, or even have ever even been on some of the roads that make up the route itself. So you get to get out to a new area. So as pointed out, they're scattered all over the state. So it's likely you're going to encounter some new turf and learn a lot about that area and birding in that area. And as you do it for multiple years, you get to know the route really well. Its ins and outs, what the hot spots are, what to expect where, and you'll see changes happening as you're experiencing your participation in the route. It's a very satisfying and interesting element to conducting a BBS. And I guarantee you 100% your birding skills are going to improve because you're put to the test 50 times in a row in the morning to figure out what you're hearing and seeing and counting the individuals. So birding skills definitely improve. I definitely have had learning curves on my routes. And of course, you're contributing to an important scientific study. Very satisfying to be able to be doing that. So let's look a little bit at some of the results. And right here on this slide, I've put together the most abundant species from the Colorado BBS. So these are the ones recorded in the highest number. And I used the data from 2019, not the most recent, but a lot of the years are kind of similar in which species group makes up this most abundant. And so not a lot of differences there from year to year. The numbers may change a little bit, but the pool of species is pretty similar. So kind of some non-surprises there heading the list as most abundant. These are cumulative totals for all the routes in Colorado. So Western Meadowlark with a handy lead of over 7,500 individuals and on a substantial portion of the route of the different routes. So 88 of the 135 routes in Colorado recorded Western Meadowlark in 2019. And we see some other very familiar, very birds that we know are very common generally in the landscape: horned lark, red-winged blackbird, American robin, mourning dove, cliff swallow, and there's our state bird, lark bunting. Now, even though these are the most abundant birds, don't assume that that means that their populations aren't changing. And several of these are declining actually. Some may be increasing, but there are a number of declining species, as we'll touch on in a minute. Many of them are detected on quite a few different routes. But as you can see, here's the California gull in the top 10 of most abundant, but only recorded from 3 routes. That's because where they are found are most of the places where they're found are at breeding colonies, and the numbers may be substantial. For example, a route I have along 11-mile reservoir where there's a colony of California gulls contributes a large part of that total right there. So here's are some of our most abundant species. Kind of fun to see is Cassin sparrow might surprise you as being one of the most abundant birds on the survey here in Colorado. Fact is, in a good year for Cassin sparrows, they can be quite common out on the prairie. Um, so that's kind of a fun one to see there. Now, the most important thing, though, is the trend information that comes from the breeding bird survey, BBS. And trends were calculated. So the BBS office provides analyzed results that you can look at online. You can download them, lots of different things. And they have a number of different sorts of ways the information is presented. Trends were calculated for 224 Colorado species during the overall period of the survey. Now, the data that's available from these analyzed results only goes through 2022 at this point, so the last few years aren't there. but for most of the life of the survey, there's trend information available for Colorado species. 224 species the survey is providing trend information about. Now, there are some caveats that impact the reliability of the trends that come out of these analyses. For example, the species may be detected on a small number of routes, which affects the quality of the trend information, or it may be at low abundance, which is also affecting that, or the analyses may provide a trend that's of low precision. So those are some of the things, and the BBS office gives you some information to be able to be aware of where those problems exist or what species are most affected. But out of the 224 species that have a trend calculated, there's 108 of them here in Colorado that showed a significant trend, either up or down, for the 30-year period that I'll be considering further in what I present tonight. So 108 species had a significant trend for the period 1993 to 2022, 30-year period there. And I've got part of my Zoom thing in the way here of my numbers. So let me see if I can pull this thing around. Here we go. So 37 of those 108 species showed significant positive trends. And the BBS rates it as high credibility, in other words, pretty strong quality of the trend analysis for 14 of those 37 species. On the flip side, 71 of the 108 species that had a significant trend had a significant negative trend. So two-thirds of those species with a significant trend in Colorado had significant negative trends, and high credibility for 72 or 52 of those 71 species. So you can see double-crested cormorant is one that has a positive trend, but it's making up part of only 34% of the species with a significant trend going in the positive direction, but most of the trends are pointing in the negative direction. 66% of the significant trends were on the downward spiral. So kind of a little bit distressing there, but that is the reality of the bird population world that we live in here in Colorado and in many places across our country. So we'll take a little look here at those species that had significant positive trends. Here's all of them for Colorado. And again, this is the period 1993 to 2022, so a 30-year chunk. And the numbers presented near the species names are the percent annual change over that period. The orange that I've highlighted some of these species in denotes, just for the heck of it, neotropical migrants. It's a particular overall grouping of birds, not taxonomic group, but more behavioral birds that migrate uh, from the northern areas to down into the tropical regions. So neotropical migrants are those ones that are shown in orange. And these are arrayed from the greatest positive trend to the lesser positive trend. And you can see, no surprise maybe, that the Eurasian collared dove is far and away number one on this list of significant positive species. As they've just colonized Colorado, I believe the first state record was 2007, somewhere right around there, if I'm off by a year or two. And now they're throughout most of the state. And so a big positive change for Eurasian collared dove. Another one that's increasing, Chihuahuan raven, and we're all familiar, I think, with the increase in bald eagles exhibiting a long-term positive response to the cessation of use of certain chemicals in the environment that led them to close to extinction. So bald eagle, another up one. And a lot of these other ones would be ones that we're familiar with as increasing species. As you move down the list, maybe you see some surprises as you look through it. The dick thistle is kind of a good one to see on a positive uptrend over this 30-year period, and a number of these other species. We can look at things like the lesser goldfinch, which has a large part of it here where I live along the Front Range zone here in Colorado. The lesser goldfinch has really increased quite a bit over say the last 40 years or so. And so that's kind of fun to see that one on there. So here's some of our positive species. Things are going well. Let's take a look at some of these leaders of the pack. We'll just highlight a few of them. And here I'm including some graphs that you can observe on the BBS website showing these trends. And the Eurasian collared dove I'm featuring here, and you can see how it was basically it was absent until it colonized the state, and then a major upwards trend, and now it seems like it's maybe leveled off. This is a situation that occurs in a lot of birds that colonize a lot of introduced species, and other ones that colonize new parts of their range. Is there may be a substantial increase, and then they get to a point where that increase has slowed or even stopped, and they stay at a certain level. They may even decrease as things go along. Kind of interesting phenomenon there. That's true for a number of different species in a similar situation. So there's a Eurasian collared dove graph. Another one that birders like to be able to find is the Chihuahuan raven. You got to get out to the right parts of our state, mostly the southeast prairie country. And the Chihuahuan raven has an interesting history in Colorado of at one point being very common back when there were still bison around. And then the numbers decreased dramatically. And in the more recent time of the BBS, things were sort of stable, but they've been increasing over the recent period. Bald eagle, which I mentioned, has gone through a remarkable comeback, and we can see this dramatic increase here in Colorado, really just in the last 25 years or so. Um, and so that's really encouraging to see. Not going to look at all of the top 10 positive birds here, so we'll skip down to cedar waxwing, a beautiful bird that's increasing pretty consistently there in the BBS data. And lastly, the dick sissel, very strong increase in recent years for that wonderful bird. But now, if you remember, we had 37 of the positive, significant positive trend species, and we had 71 of the significant negative trend species. So here's a whole slide full of species names that have been on the decline as measured by the trends from the BBS. And oh my goodness, leading the pack is our own state bird, the lark bunting, which was also one of those most abundant species that I featured on an earlier slide. The lark bunting has the steepest decline out of these species in Colorado with significant negative trends for that 1993 to 2022 period. So that's a little distressing. They still seem like they're pretty common when you get out into their good habitat areas, but the numbers are not what they used to be. And alongside there, we have a similar habitat species, the grasshopper sparrow, and a number of other species that are grassland birds we'll see in the list, and we'll touch on that in just a minute. But we'll just kind of take a moment to scan through some of these, all different kinds of habitats represented on this slide. Again, the orange indicates neotropical migrants. We see a lot of declining neotropical migrant species. Even our beloved broad-tailed hummingbird, Colorado's only nesting hummingbird, is having a significant negative trend. So we don't like that. Even really common birds, western meadowlark has a significant negative trend, even though it was leading the list of most abundant, followed by the red-winged blackbird, significant negative trend here in Colorado. So being abundant doesn't mean that there's all positive things going on in those species populations. We'll focus on the top 10 negative trends, if you will, or that's kind of a backwards way to put it, but these are the ones with the strongest negative trends. Here's our lark bunting that was leading the pack with his graph there from the BBS website. Grasshopper sparrow, marked decline. And it's not all related to my loss of hearing. They really are changing out there. A pine siskin, different sort of habitat bird, also with a clear declining trend, particularly in this period from maybe the sometime in the 1990s there. This is our trend period that we're looking at. So some of this data to the left here, where my cursor is before the 1993 2022 data period we're looking at for the trends, and we can see they've dropped off markedly over the last 30 years. The upland sandpiper, another really cool bird in Colorado with a somewhat limited distribution, breeding distribution in the state, is become a lot less numerous than it was at some time in the past. And the chestnut collared longspur, um, as it kind of looks like it comes to a peak, but then it drops off. And our period of interest here is this part of the graph. So in that more recent time, we see it's a declining species. So now we kind of looked at what's going up, what's going down, but let's look now according to habitat. So we have here what I'm calling grassland associates. These are species that have their primary habitat as grassland, and there's 21 of those species had significant trends. And here's something really distressing. Out of those 21 species, 19 of them had significant negative trends, with only 2 showing significant positive trends. Grassland habitat, as we'll talk about a little further towards the end, is one of the most habitats of one of the most concern across our continent. And certainly here in Colorado, we can see that a large portion of the grassland species are going downhill, and some of them with pretty steep declining rates. And so even including we talked about the lark bunting and a few of these others, but here's a horned lark, another generally a very common species, but with a significant declining trend. And other ones that are a little, that we know are special here in our state, like the mountain plover, significant declining trend. Only 2 of those grassland associated species, the dickcissel and the Chihuahuan raven, have a positive trend going on. Different grassland views. And then another important habitat type for birds that's generally been the focus of a lot of conservation concern is riparian habitat, the woodland and forest that grows along streams, edges of lakes, other wet areas. And riparian habitat is a primary habitat for 16 of the species with significant trends, and 10, or about 62% out of that 16, have a negative trend, with just 6 with a positive trend. So a little more of a mixed bag than for the grassland, but still a preponderance of negative trends versus positive. And there's different reasons why these things are happening, and I can't go into that too much with our time tonight. There's issues of loss of habitat, also habitat quality, changes in prey populations, a lot of different things may be affecting riparian associated species. So another widespread habitat type in Colorado are forests and woodlands. And there are 28 different species with significant trends that have forest and woodland as a primary habitat. And just like with the riparian, it's the preponderance here, about 60% with negative trends and 30% with positive trends. So again, a little bit of a mixed bag, but overwhelmingly tilted towards the negative direction for this particular habitat association. There's our pine siskin right at the top, golden crowned kinglet declining, some other upper forest birds like Hammond's flycatcher. The pinyon jay has attracted a lot of conservation concern lately for its population changes, and a number of others here. Some are that are increasing are kind of interesting. Perhaps the three-toed woodpecker with a significant positive trend that could be related to all the forests that have been killed by beetles here in Colorado over the recent decades, and providing some good habitat resources for the American three-toed woodpecker. And then some other habitats. First, urban and rural habitats. Now, the BBS doesn't really sample urban habitats much. There's a lot of rural country that gets sampled by BBS routes, but the urban areas tend to have too much traffic, and the routes are generally not placed there. But there is still some impact on BBS results from urban areas and the populations of urban birds in general are also reflected in BBS results. And this is the only habitat group that I'm looking at here tonight where the increasing birds, increasing significant positive trends are outnumbering those with a significant negative trend. And isn't it interesting to see the house sparrow with a significant negative trend, and even the European starling with a significant negative trend? That's kind of cool to be able to recognize what seems to be going on there. And other ones with positive trends, here's our collared dove again, and some of the things that are most familiar birds around our homes or out in rural areas where there's homes and ranches and what have you. Aquatic habitats have 13 species with significant trends, being primarily associated with aquatic habitats. And here again, we've gone over to the negative side. 8 of those 13 have negative trends and 5 with positive trends. You may be familiar with the Canada goose. That has been a greatly increasing species here in Colorado, partly due to changes in habitat availability. Some of the habitats they like have increased through human agency. Good to see things like sandhill crane on the upside from the BBS results, and double-crested cormorant and bald eagle both have strongly increasing populations here in Colorado on the good side there. And then I think last for our habitat groups, we have shrubland habitats. 9 species find their primary affinity in shrubland dominated areas. And this doesn't have such a pretty picture though. 8 of them with significant negative trends and just 1 with a positive trend, the lesser goldfinch that I mentioned. But field sparrow, scaled quail, even the montane breeding white-crowned sparrow, bobwhite, several of these species on the downhill slide in our shrubland habitats. One of the very interesting documents that's available, you can look it up online, is the State of the Birds report. And each year there's a new one put out. And it is a report looking at population health, summarizing it for the whole suite of different birds across the US. And it uses BBS data as one of its important data sources, along with other data sources. But the BBS is an important one that the North American Bird Conservation Initiative uses as it creates the State of the Birds report each year. And it reports that, in the last report, that 1/3 of American bird species are of high or moderate concern due either to low populations, declining trends, like we've been talking about, and other threats. And that they identified 229 species that should be prioritized for conservation to protect what we have of the populations. So if you've probably heard stats about the billions of birds that are no longer with us from since the 1960s and 70s up until now, massive changes in overall populations of birds here in North America. And we can see that reflected here in these stats that they're citing in their report. And we looked a little bit about how the grassland birds are not faring very well. Here's a neat graphic from the 2025 report using eBird data. In this case, it's eBird annual abundance trend data for prairie regions in the Midwest. And you can see Colorado is represented right there as a part of this map. And gosh, the map is red. In this case, that's a negative thing here. That's a negative trends. The darker the red, the more significant the trend is, and the bigger the circle is kind of reflecting that color, I guess. And then we have a little bit of some bluish dominated areas in part of the map, but most of it is showing in this composite map of eBird trends for grassland birds, showing a decline across this whole region. And it mentions here in the little caption, the conch sparrow, lark bunting, western meadowlark, bobolink are showing some of the largest declines. We don't have some of those species, but some of them are the ones I've already been mentioning. So big changes happening in grassland birds as represented through this report. So basically what's going on is we're losing a lot of grassland habitat or it is being degraded through different land use activities that are going on. And The report states that obligate grassland birds are in crisis. More than half of bird species that depend on grasslands for breeding habitat are in steep decline. And they identified 8 of what they call tipping point species. These are ones that are at a crux in population changes. 8 of them, more than in any other of the terrestrial biomes are considering, are are among those in steep decline. Our own mountain plover and chestnut-collared longspur are cited here as having declined more than 67% over the last 50 years. So the data from various sources, including the BBS, is helping the State of the Birds report to give us a little insight on what's going on with our bird populations. So I don't want to be all negative on everything, but this is kind of, this is what it's about. And so what to do now with all this? So I've been focusing on the BBS, and so that's what I'm going to talk about in terms of what to do now. First off, needed skilled observers to adopt an open or vacant route. There are currently, I think it's 23 open routes here in Colorado. They're going to be looking for someone to take them on this year, hopefully. Maybe we'll even get all of them assigned. That would be remarkable. And to do a survey route, you have to have good identification skills. This doesn't mean you can't grow in your skills as you're doing things and you can't practice beforehand and so on, but you have to be basically a good birder, and especially to have a decent hearing and to be able to recognize things by sound. We don't get to use Merlin out there in the field to help us along, so we got to know what's what. It is possible to record something, figure it out later. That's okay. But for the most part, you have good ID skills. And the coverage of the route is going to happen in this little window from late May to early July. You have to be able to get to the route and conduct the survey along the roads. You don't have to be the driver. You can have somebody who accompanies you in that regard, but you have to be able to get there. Some routes require an overnight beforehand if it's far away from your home. And if you're starting out for the first time, you may need to put a day into scouting the route, learning where the stops are, and so on. And the BBS project is looking for a minimum 3-year commitment from observers for a route. And that's because that's the shortest period they use for their trend analyses. So it's not particularly helpful if you do it 1 year and then somebody else takes it on for a year or two and then somebody else for a year. They're looking for a little bit of a longer commitment of multiple years, ideally at least 3 years. Here are the available routes here in Colorado just by name. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to stop this share and start another one in just a moment and show you how you can find out more about these routes. But the number on the left is part of the route name. Each one has a unique number, and then this is actually the name of the route. And here I put the counties where the route is occurring. So you can see this for yourself online, or if you look at the video of the show afterwards, you can take a little more time with that. But in just a moment, I'm going to stop this share and transition just to show you the website and how you can find out more about the routes. But first, I want to say thank you to the photographers who have contributed photos that I was able to use for the preceding slides. So I really appreciate that. And let me just stop this share here. And let's see if I can easily switch over to where I wanted to be. Somehow I'm not seeing it, so I'll go back to this. Okay, so I'm going to go to here. So now I'm on the North American Breeding Bird Survey website. This is their home page, and I see this item here, vacant routes. You can see there's different links going to other elements of the page, but vacant routes is what I just want to show you here real quick. And if I click on that, then it will take me to where I can drill down to Colorado and its routes. So I choose the United States, choose Colorado, and it gives me that same map I showed you earlier. And over here on the left side is a listing of those open routes, and the ones in red are the ones that are available or vacant. And if I click on, I can do a couple things. If I click on one of these, I'll pick one that's far away from my home there, the Dolores River, and it takes me to that in the map. It doesn't look like much, but I can hopefully see the route path here if it has it. There's the route path for the Dolores River route right there. And if I go to info right there, it will take me to a little bit of information about the route. I can look at some route details. I can find the lat long to find out kind of exactly where it is. I can look at the species list. These are all the species that have been recorded from there, so I can see what I need to know about. And I can even look at some of the specific count data if I choose to view it there, and hopefully something will happen here. So here's all the results from this route. These are years when the 1989, 1990, the route apparently wasn't surveyed, but you can see all of what's happening out there, get a sense of what's common, what's rare, what's regular on the route, and what's more irregular. So you can learn a lot about the route if you're interested in considering adopting one of them. And if you're a good birder, I hope you will consider it. It's a great thing. I'm going to stop my share here, um, and I'm going to invite Laura to come on, and we'll have a little chat there at the end.
Hey David, how's it going?
Oh, I'm doing good.
Yeah.
And I know you're a BBS veteran yourself, right?
Yeah, I do one out by the town of Sterling out east. And I camp at North Sterling Lake State Park the night before, and then my start point is like 20-30 minutes from that campground. And that's a great campground
Yeah,
in the spring. There's burrowing owls and nighthawks
that's
and
one of
then
the
the
fun
route is
parts.
very grasslands. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long have you been doing it,
I think
roughly at least?
my first year was either 2017 or 2018, something like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
And
So
you liked it
it's
enough
great.
that
You
yeah.
really do get to know a weird spot. Mine's very rural. And you really do get to know even the individual stops. I can pull up to a stop and know, okay, this is the spot where there's always a ton of grasshopper sparrows, and then or this is the spot where this happens. And mine has a lake on it, and you can kind of see it on Google Maps on the satellite. And when I was looking at the data in the BBS, it was like, oh, I'm gonna get ducks. Like this is gonna be a great survey. And the first year I went out to do it, there was no lake. Yes. I was like, what's going on? And so I was like, okay, there used to be a lake here. There's no lake anymore. It's just a dry puddle and no ducks. Um, and then a couple years ago, they must have fixed some irrigation piping or a ditch or something happened, and all of a sudden there's a lake there now again. And remember the first time I pulled up to it, you're a little scattered because you're doing the point count you've been up for so long, and I was like, holy cow, there's a lake and there's a lot of birds, and I don't know how to count all these ducks in my 3 minutes because I'm like counting meadowlarks and hornlarks, and so that was the fun surprise.
Yeah, it's fun to see those things that can change from year to year, maybe depending on rainfall or some management action or what have you. Or
Yeah.
one of my routes had a fire in part of it,
Oh,
so
wow.
there's interesting changes you can encounter and be a part of
Yeah.
observing.
Yeah. And even just seeing like how dry or how much rainfall it's had year to year can really change the birds too.
Yeah, especially out on the prairie.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple questions from Melanie. Melanie asks, looking at how species are declining across the routes in Colorado, do you know, does it feel like it's that the habitats are changing at the spots that would lead to this decline? I know that we talked a little bit about grassland degradation. What are your kind of thoughts on like what's happening?
Yeah, it's important to recognize that when you look at the trend results I was presenting, it's taking information from a lot of different routes. And so it's not what you observe in one particular route may not necessarily be representative of the bigger changes that go on. So you have to remember that kind of scale issue. But what I think comes to my mind is that there are a lot of different things going on over the decades that have been changing bird populations. One of the most important is outright habitat conversion from one thing to another, development or expansion of urban areas and areas that used to have hardly any homes or ranches to having more and then more and then more is one of the things that's affected numbers of birds on a lot of different routes. There's also exotic plants that come in and change qualities of habitat. There's changes in prey populations, things that eat insects. A lot of insect populations are suffering through long-term use of pesticides and other chemicals in the environment, making the prey that the birds need in order to have ongoing and positive populations is changing over our recorded time here. So those are some of the things that come to mind. Also, sometimes a change in one population could have a negative impact on another population. But the most important things I think are habitat loss, decreases in the quality of habitat through human actions, and in some cases, long-term climate changes could also be a factor going on. And then, as I say, changes in insect and other food populations or food availability are important things.
Yeah, yeah. And definitely, you mentioned conversion of habitat where stuff gets developed for human use, whether that's a neighborhood or a farm or whatever. But like even adjacent to that, just like the car traffic
Yeah,
could have an impact there.
and there's been a number of routes that are close to, say, the Denver metro region and other metro areas near the Front Range, where the situation along the route has changed markedly over the years it's been run, where there used to be quiet roads with few homes and things, and
Yeah.
then they just start springing up in different areas, and the traffic load increases, and things change.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm lucky with my route. I see about 10 cars over the course of the 4 to 5 hours, and they're all on one road.
Yeah.
It's an intersection. Cool. Well, Lynn asks, we both mentioned habitat changes with like, water versus no water, fire happening. And Lynn wants to know, do you document that kind of an abrupt change in your survey results? Do you note changes like that?
So it's not really a part of the data that gets reported. You are encouraged to provide some notes about things that may be notable along a route, whatever that may be, and habitat changes, uh, or habitat quality in a given year, such as all the water places are dry this year, are things that can be reported, but it doesn't go into the analyses that are going on. They can use different environmental data to work into and compare with trend changes that are going on. That's not a part of what the observers are reporting, but that's other remote environmental data from satellites and what have you that's being recorded that can become a part of how a particular researcher might look at what's going on with the changes. So, in a sense, yes, that we do note things and report them, but that's not actually part of the data reporting. And I think that kind of information is largely obtained in other fashions. And again, as I said, the BBS is dealing with either on a continent scale or a statewide scale or a bioregion scale, a particular um, um, cover types or regional sort of levels that's much broader than a particular route. So all that kind of comes together into the results.
Yeah, cool. Let's see. Susan says that she would love to participate in a breeding bird survey, but is maybe not so confident in her birding by ear, especially in areas where she doesn't bird that often. What's your best advice for how to improve my birding by ear leading up to a survey?
Well, one thing you could do is you could go into the website as I just showed and look at the different available routes and find one that you think is in a region where you feel a little more comfortable with the birds. And as I showed, you can look and see exactly what's been recorded on the route and figure out what are the things that are common and what are the things that are less common. And so you can kind of see where you feel your abilities fit into that reality. And if someone is interested in a route and they don't feel like they're quite there yet or interested in a certain sort of region of the state, say a prairie route, you can work on that intentionally this year, for example, by going
Yeah.
out to a particular route or another one, or just out to those habitats and intentionally develop your skills and work toward picking up a route in a future year. Or even if you are feeling like you're a lot of the way there, but you know you probably have some brush up to do, you could visit the particular survey route before you do your survey. It's a little more time commitment, but you can do a little mini survey or a bird along the route and see what you're encountering, and even then you can use Merlin maybe, and that might help give a clue of some things you're not catching, or you can compare to the past results and see, well, in the past they had cassin sparrows, or let's say grasshopper sparrow, and I'm not really detecting any of them or very many, and maybe that's a clue. This is something that I need to figure out how to detect a little better. Um, I think that if one feels reasonably comfortable with the species in a particular area, then that might be an okay time to take on a route. But you can do a little homework there and figure it out. I'll just mention right now that my if you want to email me, you may already know my email address, but it's D as in David, D, and then my last name, SUDDJIAN @gmail.com. And you can send me an email with any particular questions and I can help further.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely I remember my first time going out to my survey and I'd been studying like what's the difference between a lark bunting and a lark sparrow and all these different birds that I knew were going to be singing at dawn and like man, before 5 a.m. when you're at that like pre-dawn chorus on the plains, it's an overwhelming amount of sound and you can't see the birds. So um, knowing your birds by sound is definitely important, but it's an achievable thing for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Jason asks, we were looking at the species trend graphs in part of your slide deck, and he noticed there appeared to be three different trend lines and was curious what those represent, if you know.
So I think it's showing like an upper and lower confidence limit
Okay.
associated with the trend. So it's kind of, I don't know if it's a standard deviation or I think it's probably more complicated than that, but it's kind of showing the range at which the trend accuracy may be bounded,
Mhm.
if that helps.
Yeah, cool. And Topi asks, do you know who manages the breeding bird survey in Mexico?
I don't. And I haven't seen much information about that on the website I was showing you, the USGS
Mhm.
BBS. And so I'm a little, what I have looked into and what they do provide, it makes me wonder if things are ongoing there and strong or what's happening. But there's not a lot of info, and I haven't pursued that very
Yeah.
much.
I have found the BBS people fairly responsive, like emailing them about questions about my route and stuff. So, Topi, you might try just emailing the USGS folks and seeing if they have an answer. Let's see, other questions. Um, was there we talked about um the species that were increasing, the species that many of them which are decreasing in prevalence across the breeding bird survey data in Colorado. Were there anything else that you haven't talked about already that was like a big surprise to you when you saw that data?
Um, it's a big question. Um, nothing's really coming to my mind there. I think that I would say I don't have a specific example, but some things that I would have thought are going downhill based on my limited view from
Mhm.
personal experience and general knowledge were not showing downhill trends, say in the BBS, or they may what the BBS records and trends may go contrary to my impression of things. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, I don't have anything in particular
Okay.
that comes to mind.
Very cool. So we talked about where you can read about the bird survey, where you can look for vacant routes, where you can see all the data about what birds are on those routes. You mentioned the state of the birds report. Are there any other like resources about the breeding bird survey that you can think of that folks might want to be aware of?
Well, there's a lot of other information on that website
Yeah, sure.
that you can poke around in and learn a lot of other things. They have They have several different ways that they present the data, and you can even download things. And if you're savvy about that kind of stuff and mess with stuff yourself, but there's a lot more to be learned there. I was just focusing tonight on uh, their trend analyses for those particular years. But you can also look at other states and see how things may not be the same from one area to another. You can look at different scales. You can look at different ecological biomes. I think they call them. I forget what, but they have the whole uh, North America divided up into various polygon shapes representing basically
Mm,
different general habitat areas. Like we looked at that grassland one, for example, there at the end. So there's a lot of information in there, and probably if you just kind of Google things in general, you can get to a lot of different things that are either drawing from BBS results or somehow connected to that.
cool. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in. So thanks, David.
You're welcome, and thanks, Laura, for helping me out. And the next bird bombs will probably be in March, but it'll be to be announced. I'll let everybody know about that in advance. I don't have a specific date or I have a topic in mind, but not a specific date. So uh, uh, more to be revealed. And thanks everyone for watching, and see you next time.